Coming at you with another set of Cosmonarchy casts. This one is going to be a two-game set between the Shambler and ECalipso. We'll be going to Maxiom for this one, and I am excited to see who comes out on top. I believe, in this particular case, it will be, yes, the Shambler playing as Zerg, while ECalipso plays in the top right here as Protoss. So, the Shambler down here in the bottom left. This is on a slightly older version of pre-release, so it's not all of the balance tweaks and changes that have been deployed to the current release version. This game was played on the 16th of May, but I imagine the meta game will be somewhat similar. However, maybe ECalipso, I don't actually know what the timeline is here precisely, but maybe ECalipso will find it a little bit easier to, for example, field Patriarchs and such versus Zerg. He did say in an interview after his group in May Royal Invitational, that he was indeed having some fun with the Zerg matchup, the Protoss versus Zerg matchup. You can see here he's going for a 9-gate, not exactly interested in producing workers the whole way through, wants to get that first gateway out fast and ready, while we have the Droleth scout here from the Shambler, who's going by Liberty Prime, obviously referencing and representing his clan, the United States Cosmonarchs. Meanwhile, ECalipso still rocking the PG tag, but really, he's joined Clan Oops now. Very funny, very funny. PG is obviously a reference to I think it's Programmer DE or something. It's a German clan from some time ago now. So as the Scribe scouts, and as the Droleth scouts, and as the build orders continue to avail themselves here with a hatch in the main from none other than the Shambler, not at all by the ramp, by the way, but just in the main. I want to take this opportunity to say hi, and to say welcome to Cosmonarchy if you're new, or if you're on the newer side, and thank you for checking out yet another cast. Thank you for joining us. We have some very different ideas, some very different concepts going here than StarCraft 1, and also then compared to StarCraft 2. The most recent update added 2 new units, which is increasing the unit count even further, which might come as a surprise to people, but yes, we are missing a couple of units for a couple of the races. So the Protoss, for example, have a new structure that is going to be added later on this week if I can wrangle the time and the graphics to do so. And after that, it's also they have a couple of additional units that they need to be able to make. So yeah, let's just say there's some stuff that needs to be done for them. The Zerg probably need I would say 2 or 3 more units as well. So it's a kind of situation where we're pretty close to being done in terms of the roster fill-outs. And you can see, I don't know, I'm not sure about this build order from the Shambler, but it's kind of interesting, right? Hatch, Circuit, Pool, late Pool. I guess he wants to go for a more like macro-oriented. Obviously the only thing he can make right now are workers and the transport strain, the Ovoleth, but he's going for all workers right now. Maybe he wants to bypass the Pool unit phase of Zerg and go straight in for something else. Now, he did mention that he felt like he's trying to shake his Zerg rust off, get a feel for the new meta, see what's going on with that. And, that maybe these games would be more interesting and more entertaining and maybe more educational for Zergs if they see like him trying to do a different style than what Zergs are used to now, since he is a former Zerg player turned Protoss and coming back to it just for a little bit here. It's going to be an embassy to follow up the 2 gates. ECalipso rocking the faster expansion. He went and rescouted to see that indeed the Pool was not coming just yet. But okay, so we have a very fast Vornath here. But we don't have any additional Vespene being harvested, and he's going to go for his expansion now. So Shambler is going to check out what he can do with the Zethar evolution. That's the only thing he's going to be able to afford, because the Vespene cost, obviously, of the flying unit that you get access to when you make the upgraded Pool, that is indeed going to be a pretty big deal. Now, Shambler had his trademark move where he burrows a worker there. Indeed, that has just been bopped, so pretty funny. Now we have 4 Vorvs being gestated in the middle of the map. The mutated Zethar strain gives it the ability to apply ensnare and an armor rend to its target. So the armor rend is capped at 1. It can't rend more than 1 armor. It's not like a stacking armor rend. But it does mean that Zealots and Drakodins will deal a little bit less, they'll take a little bit more damage from the Quasilisk in particular, which is not actually being fielded right now for the Shambler. He wants to go for his swarm of Zeths at first. He is setting up his expansion. I actually think that based on the current military count, he could absolutely overwhelm ECalipso, but he wants to get a couple of additional Vorva cores. Their DPS is lower than the Zeth, but because of their durability being so much higher, right, that you're talking about 35 extra health and 1 armor over the Zethra core, it does give the Vorv a little bit more survivability to get into the fight. And the way that Zerg works now in Cosmonarchy is that if you lose your unit that was mutated from a base unit, it turns back into what it originally came from. So that can actually be pretty impactful here. Now, speaking of impact, that Witness catching the move out is going to make ECalipso take a more defensive formation. I do have to worry about his position here, though. I'm not sure how much respect he's going to give to this initial force. He's spreading out, which is kind of good, but also not super good because it does increase the surface area of a good surround. We'll see what the Shambler is thinking with his force. He sizes him up and immediately goes for that attempted surround, jumping on the back line, ignoring the front line for the most part, and these Drakodons are indeed going to start falling. The Scribe's getting pulled, maybe a little bit late, but better late than never. These Zealots idling over here definitely need to join the fight, but ECalipso too busy trying to kite backwards. Looks like he will eventually hold, but at the cost of losing a lot of his Drakodons. And those are units that are a little bit hard for him to actually deal with. In fact, if he's not careful, these 3 remaining melee units are going to run amok inside his base. Looks like an attempted surround there. He even gets it at the end. Yeah, that's some efficiency. And again, like, these 2 Zealots being idle were a big reason why Calypso lost so many Striders there. So that was basically reducing his Strider count, resetting it to almost nothing. And those are the units that can really punish pool units for Protoss in this matchup. So seeing a transition into the Shroud, a 3rd base coming up, you love to be in the Shambler's position here. He's got even workers. He's definitely had the advantage in terms of tempo now, capitalizing upon that successful attack, knowing that he can't really be pressured. He is going to go ahead and expand, but still be making additional military units as the Witness does its little info dance here. The Ovaleth flying over to see what's happening, sees that it's only gateways. ECalipso doesn't actually have any investment going for something higher in tech, although he can afford that. He does have about 700 of each resource, but let's see if he can even hold out for it. He might not be able to spend his money to begin with. His workers being harassed, these are not what the Zeth-Vorv combo is super effective at, attacking workers under duress. That would be more so maybe a Quasilisk thing, although they're also pretty low mobility. So he dives in, he sees that the army is pretty much the same, and yes, an Ancestral Archives is coming. That's sort of what I predicted in my head about ECalipso. He does like the Ancestral Archives. That's going to give him access to some good splash damage to deal with this. And one of the things that I think Protoss are starting to learn, I've seen Arbuz, who we saw his cast over debut against ECalipso not so long ago. He's actually going to be playing in the tournament coming up later today. I guess by the time you listen to this, it's actually already played. But later today for me, I'm recording this the morning of. And the cool thing about his Protoss and about a couple of other people playing Protoss is that they really do respect the lattice openers versus Zerg. The splash damage that can control the pool opener. It does definitely force out more units like perhaps the Gorga Core, but more likely the Hydralisk. Now, in this situation, even though some worker damage is going to get dealt, I do really like this position here for the Shambler. He's wiping out this paltry force with his Gorgs. Yeah, sure, you can criticize him for not having caught this attack with at any earlier point. He will end up losing some workers for it. But Zerg can replenish their worker stocks pretty easily, and the drilling over here is stopping a lot of the Drolets from dying, funnily enough. And now, there's all of these Gorgs. Where's the crowd control? Where's the splash damage? Wardens being added post-haste, but those take about 30 seconds to complete. A little bit more, actually. And the Ancestral Archives is done, but there's only one Patriarch in production. So the Gorgs can absolutely hit hard at this point. We'll have to see if those, if you can stack the Drakodons into such an area where they become a juicy target. There's so many of them at this stage. I do feel like ECalipso is moments away from being toppled in this position here. His Drakodon's not spread out, so they are going to take the crowd control damage from the Gorga cores. I'm keeping them selected because I think it's more important to tell how much HP they have. So they will end up being bruised by those Wardens. And these two are going to be done, but that other one not so. And by putting them in the mineral line, it's actually quite debilitating for the worker count here, because the workers are also suffering splash damage. They're not being evacuated. Now, the Patriarch is here to do some splash damage. These Gorgs, unfortunately for the Shambler, flying into their sure demise, not really able to get any value out of that. And of course, the Matrix is here now to act as anti-crowd control damage for the workers. So I feel like now these bases are going to be a lot harder to attack into, and Gorgon cores are very expensive as well. So it does stand to reason that, oh no, but the Patriarch being all the way over here is a big whiff, though. It has to be said, that Patriarch was so expensive. There is another one out, but is it gonna matter? The Matrix debuffed by Ensnare, huge game changer for stopping that from sustaining the workers and everything else. So they are all going to end up falling as the Patriarch is driven further back. It might die if ECalipso's not careful. Thankfully, he kites backwards for it. But his ground units, his gateway units, his workers, all of them looking a lot worse for wear at this stage in the game. And that's mostly just due to the Vornath. Behind this, we've got more Gorgs, some Zoryus. We also, very importantly, have the Iral Iris starting. This is tier 2 for Zerg. And when they can get that going, when they can do that with a 20 or 30 odd worker advantage, you know that they are in a very, very good position, prime position, you might even say, to take the game. So the Shambler indubitably ahead at this point. We need to see some securing of a third base somehow for ECalipso. And he also needs to trade some very, very cost-efficient fights. Take some very, very good engagements here. And you know what? He has the tools to do so with Patriarchs. They are basically like super good infinite sustain batteries after a certain point when you get enough of them. Versus, small units like this that can stack up. Versus air units like the Gorgocord that obviously stack up as well. So I'm not going to write him off, but he's definitely not favored. And with tier 2 now complete, we should see, if the Shambler is indeed up on the meta at this stage in the game, which I'm not sure he is, we should see the Mutath come out because that will unlock some good units for sniping down the Patriarchs, the Protathalor Chief among them. Shambler not able to pounce on the attack just yet, but the Patriarchs obviously zoning away the stacked air. A couple of these Zealots are going to get battered on the way out. There's a little overlay that appears for a brief period of time on the Gorgocores when they get debuffed, and that's because they are being affected by something that allows any unit that attacks the victim to restore its shields. So one of the Patriarchs does go down, but the front line was all Zealots, and they were left unsupported versus everything else while the Gorgs just chased the Patriarchs back. So at this point, you have to give it to Shambler. He is really commencing the attack, and the Nexus is dead. Like, there's no saving it. So at this point, losing your natural, I feel like ECalipso has to consider, maybe this game isn't for me. Maybe this isn't the one I'm going to win. The cost efficiency needed to happen. Like I said earlier, his ultimate objective has to be to take a third base. Shambler was setting up a fourth down at the 9 o'clock-ish position. I guess you'd call that 8 o'clock on the minimap. That's a significant advantage. Now up to, it's not just that he was up one base with his third, he was up 2 bases. Now he's up 3 on account of deleting ECalipso's natural. So, unfortunately for our Mexican representative in Cosmonarchy, he is going to end up being, essentially put out to pasture here, unless there's a series of significant flubs. But he's going to go ahead and stick into it for now. There's Lakizilisks coming with no detection. I mean, the detection is out here, but it's not really able to do too much just yet. I think, he's seeing the 8 o'clock position there. We obviously have the Gorgs coming in with no crowd control to stop the worker death. All of the workers stacked up into one location. And, the Patriarch says we shall never fall. Sure. But the workers, they might not agree. No, it looks like the stacking is definitely paying off for ECalipso. Kind of baiting him in there. But even still, just at this point, any worker death is too many, I would say. See what the Lakizilisks and such can do when the next attack wave commences. Lots of workers just standing around. Shambler now at a ridiculous number. And 13 Protathalors coming up. That's the sign that's just going to allow him to pick off these Patriarchs. They don't have the range necessary to compete with something like that. And there have been no Optectons made. I mean, who can afford them at this point? There have been no... nothing that you can actually use to deal with the Protathalor, which by itself doesn't attack air, so maybe you'd think Exemplar or something. Stuff like that. And we saw that ECalipso was thinking about that as a countervailing force. But at this stage, I think it's fairly clear who the winner is going to be, and we'll be moving on to game 2 almost immediately, I would say, as soon as those Protathalors start reigning supreme. But it does give you some insight into what was going on with the Zerg. There was another replay that was played before this game where I'm not sure who won that one, but unfortunately the replay wasn't functional. When you started it off, the second player didn't load in, according to the replay. So that was really funny. Maybe that was just sent in by mistake, and I was only ever supposed to look at 2 games. But ECalipso didn't have his own version of the replay, so alas. Now, despite all of that, the Lachezilisks are going to be able to burrow. The Protathalor is currently taking their sweet time targeting anything of value. They are going after the Zealots instead. These ones burrowing over here, it's a dastardly move. It does force yet another pull away from the natural. And the Protathalors are just going to start shelling those Patriarchs. He had 4 again for a moment there, but he's losing more and more and more. The Witness is here to reveal the units, but at this point, there's so many Protathalors that it doesn't really feel like you're going to be able to get too much of value here. The Lachezilisks are obviously still in play. The Nexus falling again. And you know what? Again, ECalipso holding out marvelously in a way, but he was behind from a pretty early stage. He wasn't able to make it through. Damn, GG is called. First Zerg to give me liberty. Well played, yeah. Apparently the first time he's fallen to a Zerg. All right, so it looks like he's asking for another game here, and we will indeed have that. So his first Zerg defeat in recorded Cosmonarchy history by when it happened. Of course, Krankendow was able to serve him up a little bit in the Invitational. Join us in a moment for game number 2. All right, we are indeed back with game number 2. We have ECalipso in the top right once again, but it's Liberty Prime, aka the Shambler, in the bottom right this time. Same matchup, same races, of course. But despite the fact that it's the same map by BittyB no less, it's also different spawns, right? Vertical spawns as opposed to cross spawns. Normally in cross spawn games, we end up going a bit longer. At least that's what I've noticed. But I like, so far, what I'm seeing about the meta developments that I've seen in recent games on 4-spawn maps, but also in games in the tournament where it looks like you can have long games on 2-spawn maps, but you can also have short games on 4-spawn maps, even when things are cross-spawn, right? So, I don't know. I like that. I think that's interesting. There's been a lot of discussion. I mentioned it briefly in the last cast over, talking about how random elements, be it race or spawn, will impact the game. And I know that in Starcraft 2 and also in other RTS games, when they did flirt with 4-spawn maps, a lot of the times they would just specifically say, hey, your enemy spawned here. And so it was only really changing the RNG side of things insofar as it made it so that you might have to play using a different configuration, right? That's sort of the idea, right? It's like randomly selecting your spawn but still revealing your spawn to your opponent still has an impact on the game because there's certain openers or certain styles or certain interactions that you're only going to get from certain spawn configurations. But the luck of finding them first, last, second, whatever, that is gone in a realm where you have the reveal on start. And I guess you could say the same thing about the race sort of idea of it, where you're going for random and, okay, I've rolled Zerg, and instead of telling you or not, like deciding whether to share that information, if the game automatically said, so-and-so, random Zerg, is Zerg now or something. Zerg signatures detected. I don't know, something like that, right? And so if you had something like that, what would the impact of that actually look like? What would it be? And I don't know if it would be something where, I tend to tell my race anyway, most of the times, and I just play random because I like the idea of the game deciding what race I'm going to be. And in that situation, maybe it should even show it in the lobby as opposed to in the game. But I also think there's some element of ceremony to it showing up in the game that's pretty interesting. And so, I don't know, there's certainly things to think about there. Unfortunately, Shambler was a little too slow to react to pull his worker scout away. I wanted to get up the ramp and see if he could find any tech. That could have been another explanation. But he's gone for the same opener where he goes hatch, circuit, pool. I know that some people in the Zerg community, if you want to call it, the Zerg cabal, have already developed this idea that the Larvosk is simply better. I know Nebline is of that opinion. Krankendow seems to be of that opinion as well. Again, we talked about that sometime recently as well. I would like it for there to be pros and cons to a certain strategy. So the fact that the Shambler is trying this one out in this cast, I don't know if he would try this if he played Zerg some more, or if he would divest himself entirely from Hatch first and go straight for Larvosk only. I don't know. Like, people think it's simply better. On the one hand, it's not terrible if you have that as like the good macro opener. But I like that we currently have some ideas, right? AOT going for pool into Larvosk as an opener is kind of interesting as well to think about it. This time, Shambler going to stick with the Vespene harvesting for now. Maybe wants to afford an Ovaleth or something in addition to the Vornath. He's not pulled his gas miners away just yet. We saw him selecting it. I think he was thinking about it, but he wants a little bit more. Maybe spike up in tech a little bit faster. We have a proxy Stargate coming from ECalipso. This is one of the things that he is a fan of doing. And when this Ovaleth pops in here, if it's not immediately dealt with, which I don't really think it can be because there's only the one Dracodon, I wonder if that's not going to be a problem in general, right? I wonder if that's not going to be something where the Shambler will put 2 and 2 together and say, hey, you don't have that much stuff over here. What's going on? So here comes the Dracodon to try to zone him away. But there is no natural expansion coming, and the Shambler should definitely be like, hey, wait a second, what's happening here? You only have 2 gates, whereas last game you had 3 when I did the same move. Now, the embassy was made in his face and then canceled. So I guess that's probably, in some way, ECalipso trying to hedge his bets. He did this against AOT as well, funnily enough. And he said that, he's basically saying to himself, I need to make it seem like I have something happening here. You should definitely see something at this timing. So I'm going to put that down, and then I'm going to cancel it after you leave. And that's pretty interesting. So 4 Vorvs are dispatched. We've got Nathrakors coming, which is what the gas was all for. I'm not sure about this situation. I guess we only have the 2 Dracodons, but with good kiting, you might see the Dracodons still run away with that particular engagement. The Vorvs, if they can get in on top and actually attack the Dracodons to slow them down, will allow the Nathrakors to really stick to it. But let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. The one Zeth just charging up forward and seeing what it can do. I guess that was actually a Vorv, right? And it turned back into a Zeth. We talked about that regression mechanic in the last game that we just saw earlier, where Shambler took the crown. Gladius is being made from that proxy Stargate. This is exactly what we would expect from this man. So far, he's not actually, he's just sort of throwing caution to the wind and moving out. This could mean that, obviously he wants to do a timing attack with those 2 Gladiuses that pop out. And Gladius is actually, versus the Nathrakors, it really is a micro fight, right? Like, if you can keep the Gladiuses alive, usually you want Hierophants for that particular purpose to help slow down the enemy. In this case, the gas is a little bit too constrained for that, I think. But, usually you want something in that situation. Now, the Zealots and Dracodons are sighted. I feel like Shambler should have known that this attack was coming, but as you can see here, he is caught a little bit unawares and hemorrhaging some of his Nathrakors. Now, the Gladiuses, meanwhile, are engaging back in the worker count and reducing it quite massively, I would say. So the Nathrakors are going to dive on. You got to watch out for this because they can and will eviscerate the Gladius. Looks like he wants to disengage so that the bounces expire, and then he's going to go ahead and dive back in for another round, and that's exactly what you would think of doing versus the Gladius. So that works out in his favor, but his dallying in that respect has guaranteed that he loses the Hatcherosk in his natural, and he will undoubtedly end up losing the other one. These Nathrakors, I mean, more of them are being made, but these ones are busy getting absolutely just demolished by the Gladius now, and he's just now asking Proxy with a question mark. I don't know if ECalipso is going to say anything until after the game. But that's sort of him asking worker count. Now, he will end up saving his Hatcherosk, for his second Hatcherosk there. He can sort of distance mine if he wants to. And saving this one is pretty important. Obviously, the... oh, look at this, a land effect. That's really, really cool. So... he does end up saying yes, but the land effect out here does mean that it's going to be quite difficult for the Nath stack to really get much done. He's going to see if he can just overpower it. I mean, you could just activate Disruption Field. We'll see if that's what ECalipso does. Oh, no, he's actually going to go after the stack of units. They're going to go after the pylon. I'm not sure. I mean, this is actually a really tough micro decision for Shambler. Which one does he focus down? Well, it didn't activate its passive, so that is an easier decision to make. And now, of course, the Gladius is going to get munched on. So, okay, Stargate goes dark. It indeed will no longer be around. There is no counterattack coming just yet. And remember, ECalipso did have a poorer economy, right? He canceled that embassy, which Shambler doesn't know yet. And he doesn't have a lot of workers at this stage. So he needed to get damage dealt with that. He did. He slowed down the growth. He destroyed the Hatcherosk, kind of reset the table as if this game was a little bit further back. However, there is a third base on the way, right? So, I don't know. It's kind of interesting. I guess we'll have to wait and see what ends up happening there. Despite that, the Nathicors are flying across the map, empowered, feeling good about the fact that they no longer have to worry too much about any other air threats, and they can be a little bit less shackled as a result. They can definitely go for a little bit more of an aggressive play. Moving in with way too few units, I think, is the Shambler. But admittedly, his Nats are going to dive onto the Dracodons and see what we can make happen there. There are some Hierophants here. Quasis are by far the worst unit to attack a Nexus with. They have no armor. Well, they have one armor pen, but they don't really do very well versus armor. And you can see the Striders being able to take on the Nathicors head-on. So I do feel like maybe those Nathicors could have been banked for Tier 2, maybe turned into Calculists where they could have been more useful, maybe patrol the skies, see if there's going to be a drop or a follow-up with air. You could also just move them all around the map and use them as scouts. There's definitely value you could have gotten out of them, but I don't think a frontal attack was the answer. And now that there's Wardens at both bases, I feel like it's really going to be quite difficult for them to get any harassment done after the fact. So a lot of static defense being set up behind the Hatrosk, well behind the Hatrosk. I'm not sure what that's about. We are going to see another move out here from ECalipso. He doesn't have much of a front line, but as soon as he gets rid of these Nathicors, he's not really going to have much to worry about when it comes to enemy, what would you call it? Yeah, I guess just melee in general. I guess the worker counts. All right, well. Now we have a little bit of a game on our hands, right? Because at this stage, the Shambler has to do something about his third base being under attack. He really doesn't want to lose that. He set up circuits defensively at the natural, but he does need to come up with something. Going for the Iral Iris at the natural as well, taking a page out of Anozlix's book. Shout out Anozlix, the author of the music that you hear inside the main menu screen. And yes, indeed, the Hatrosk will end up going down. So no third base here, but ECalipso decides to stick around, I think, way too long, knowing what we know about how Zerg work. And so he has sacrificed all of his Striders, just about. Well, he's going to put down a third Warden in the natural, and I do think Shambler is going to go for a counterattack here. I don't know that he's going to be too successful. We've got more Gateways coming, more Zealots coming. He only has 2 Striders waiting back at home, these 3 returning. This Vorvacor could unburrow and maybe ensnare one of these Dracodons here, but not going to happen. And indeed, the Rogue Gallery here to add a little bit more buffer. If you're going to try to run up that ramp, it's going to be a little bit awkward for you. Good surround, though, coming in here. I do feel like the positioning could have been a bit better for ECalipso. This does allow some of the units to get into the main, but we're not really that worried about that because there are 3 Wardens. And so even though some of the Gateway units end up falling, you can see here the worker count is not going to be dropped too low. It looks like only 2 workers went down. And so we are just happy about that, just dandy. And actually, I feel like, once again, ECalipso has an advantage here. Not in terms of worker count, but in terms of the ability to just say, hey, I'm not threatened at all right now. He does need to think about teching into something else. I mean, going for the Rogue Gallery is a nice, you can multiply your power in general. But it looks like he's just going to go for his trusty Ancestral Archives. There it is. And probably a Crucible after the fact, if I had to guess. Wow, it's almost like I've cast his games before. More hatches happening out by the ramp and the choke into the third. So, of course, the Shambler with the worker advantage here. Only now starting to matter because he's been just fully saturated in his... I guess one thing to say is that ECalipso hasn't fully saturated his gas nodes and such in his natural. But besides that, he's getting some mineral income over ECalipso. Maybe like half a base. But now that he's actually got his third set up and he's actually transferring / making workers and putting them over here, like he was very oversaturated. His accessing tier 2 gives him access to the gas caps. So now you're really going to start to see him turn the screws, economically speaking. This hatch is not going to last. See, it's not even going to get canceled, but, whatever. He's got plenty of cash. Again, he doesn't need to be super efficient per se. So he will end up losing that circuit, and nice changing in the target to get rid of one of them before it can even finish morphing. Oh, a second one as well. Big fan of that. We'll see these Protathlors are being hatched. So yeah, shutting down this third base kind of evens the scales a little bit. Again, I would still expect Shambler to have more money, considering he has more saturation going for all of his bases. We have a Scorchrith being ready to be dropped out of this Irelef. And, if you can target down this base, that's great. However, you can see Shambler discovering the neutral treasury at 6 o'clock means that he can just transfer his workers over in that direction and still have some value for them. Something that I think is underutilized on Maxiom, actually. We don't see it happening too often. Charlatan coming out of the Rogue Gallery. This is something I haven't actually seen ECalipso use too often. Maybe ever? but I honestly can't remember if he used it in the Royal Invitational. That would have been after this anyway. So this might be the first time I'm seeing him use it, chronologically speaking. His one zealot revealing that indeed the workers are harvesting. Now there's only minerals over here, so there is that to be aware of. And look at that. 1 HP, dude. 2 armor, Chad. Only 1 armor pen? Not so Chad. Needed a bar guest. Now, yeah, okay, he's realizing, okay, I should definitely check my space as well in case you're pocket mining that too, like a lunatic. But I guess he was just getting vision so he could transfer some of his workers over there. Wants to emulate the same sort of style. Now, a Charlatan and a Patriarch are here, so we are going to see this army mostly get dealt with. However, all these Protathalors, they focus down the high-value targets. No Charlatan, no Patriarch. So they've kind of done what they came here to do. My only concern for them is that most of them are going to die on the way out. So it's kind of like trading down the high-value targets. You make the Protathalors so that you can snipe those high-value ones, and you hope that your opponent can't keep up in the macro department because they're Protoss and you're Zerg. And in this case, Shambler is actually correct in that. I mean, he has more workers. He's obviously getting value out of his workers to a higher degree with more saturation going at the 6 o'clock position. He's also setting things up there. I would love to see ECalipso walk down and destroy the treasury so that Shambler has to rebuild that base himself if he wants it. But instead he's going to see if he can cancel / destroy the 3rd yet again. I'm not so sure he'll be as successful. He does have a Patriarch out already. But the Hatrosk is blocking his initial attack in. Good use of walling. You know, ECalipso maybe hasn't played against a Zerg that has done this before. But yeah, he's just going to finally try to bust that. It's only a couple of 100 HP there. Okay, finally it's going to go down. But the sustained artillery fire from the Protathalors is definitely debilitating his ground army. And he lost his Stargate earlier and hasn't reinvested in it. So a bit awkward there. He's going after a 3rd base of his own, but he's definitely taking his sweet time in getting there. Has a lot of minerals. Could definitely be dropping it at this point. But yeah, I think at this point, the Shambler has a winning composition in theory, especially once these Zorius and Vorvs get to the front line so that his Protathalors can't be collapsed upon. And what we would need to see out of ECalipso is maybe a more massive Vagrants so that he can dive onto the Protathalors. Maybe more Zealots, maybe Amaranth, something that can actually deal with it. But you can see the Patriarch's getting sniped, and there is no answer to that just yet out of ECalipso. Also, I noticed that, obviously, Krankendow went for Mass Lyrilisc earlier as well. They kind of do the sniping job, but as a mobility unit that charges forward and uses the fact that they have a really ridiculous mobility advantage on most units. And the Protathalors don't really have that mobility. Obviously, you can see them getting hit pretty hard here. And as soon as they start to tuck tail and turn away, they're not going to move nearly as fast as the rest of the army. So instead, they're just kind of kiting back and forth. And before you say it, I already know. The Protathalor model is not very Zergy, is it? We'll get to it eventually. A lot of these graphics are taken from other RTS games that we've been able to data mine. Not exactly our main, like our what we would like to have here. We'll get some better ones eventually. Now, the Zorius frontline is being destroyed by the Charlatan Patriarch combo. Only now are the Protathalors actually targeting down some of those higher value units. The 3rd base is being set up, but you can see it right there, man. Protathalor is just annihilating that Patriarch, and you're just kind of constantly in a state of like, okay, you've invested so much money in the Protathalors that you can't necessarily overwhelm with everything else until you have more base advantage. The one Zorius and Protathalor hit squad over here. Some Zealots dispatched to deal with that. 12 o'clock being assailed next, almost certainly. Actually, with this cliff advantage as well, it's going to be even harder for this Protathalor squad to be attacked, and you know they can even attack the 12 o'clock position. That's assuming, I mean, Shambler might just accidentally do that with an attack move at some point. I can't believe the Nexus actually got destroyed somehow. That's crazy. Or maybe it was like canceled at the last moment. I think that might make more sense. All right, well, ECalipso has to defend his investment at 12. And there's a lot of Protathalors, a little bit of chaff with regards to the Quasis, and some Zorius as well for tanking. Yeah, it's not like a very mobile composition. It's not the normal swarm comp that you normally see, but it's still pretty cool. Protathalor could be focusing down this Patriarch, but he's kind of caught and bisected. Like, this squad was just hit in, and most of the Protathalors are already dead. So that's a little bit awkward there, but the Patriarch will indeed end up falling because, you know, it's not actually falling away. Oh, no, he actually does withdraw a little bit. And so that means that most of these Protathalors are gone. But there's another hit squad coming in. And is it even fair to call it a hit squad? I think this one is just a straight-up army. So these 3 will end up dying, but there's more coming from the right-hand side. I still think ECalipso has the ability to do some pretty good damage here. to this attack force. He just needs to hit it from the right time, and he needs to be able to fall back and defend from the Wardens at the same time, if that is indeed where his army is going to be coming in from. No, instead he's going to take the proactive route and attack up the ramp. Now, that is scary based on the cliff advantage, but is Shambler tunnel visioning a little bit too much and trying to kill those Patriarchs? I mean, he's trying to kill the one on the low ground, now it's on the same ground, and you ignore this one that was open season up there, coming in from the north. I feel like maybe the Shambler has not invested in sustained damage outside of the Protathlors. These ones are more burst-oriented, and indeed, he is just going to go ahead and concede this fight. The Zealots coming out, Charlatans. We finally have more than one Patriarch at a time, so that's going to help with the healing. They can heal each other in a way that they can't by themselves. So yeah, a hard-fought game so far. The Shambler not finding the magic sauce ingredient to add to his stew of Protathlors. However, we still have a pretty marked macro advantage here for the Shambler. Not only does he have almost 30 workers in terms of an advantage, he also is not only now setting up his third base. That is a privilege reserved for ECalipso. And okay, we have got some Sikralisks out. They deal some splash damage in a small radius, so it does help a little bit with the Zealot stacking. I would love to see some Lakizilisks with this army, especially since there's no detection, but we're not going to see that here. Instead, the Zealots are just going to continue trying to break down these barriers and see what more they can do. Protathlors on the high ground are going to aggro some of them. No more frontline happening over here. Wrapped around by a squad from the north. Unfortunately for the Shambler, he is going to end up losing most of those, but he has routed the bulk of the Protoss army, and one of the Protathlors even falling. The other one, very low from earlier, it is going to go down as well. So the high-value army is being pieced out by the Shambler. He's kind of piecing them up and just sort of nailing them to the wall here. Sikralisks helping out with the Zealots as well. Definitely a favored option for crowd control in a pinch. They don't do quite as well as the Lakizilisks do, but they have the benefit of being able to move around. And you can see here with the Patriarch healing, the Zealots are able to stay competitive, and the Protathlors weren't able to actually finish off that last one. So good focus fire there. Third base now finally up. Needs some defenses, needs some worker transfer. There we go. Starting to get a little bit of that action going on, removing his... maybe leaving the rest of his bases a little understrength. Actually, if ECalipso had 20 more workers in this position, I would love his spot a little bit more. He could obviously try to oversaturate that base. He's got, you know, a little bit of something planned over here in the... I guess that would normally be like the fourth base or something for the top left spawn. We'll see if he can actually secure 10 o'clock, or if it will be all over. Another force heading into 12 o'clock to deny the mining. Maybe just hit the treasury and be done with it. Can't repair it. You're not Terran. Now he's going to go after the workers and clean them up. This force is pretty scary, but it's not surrounding, right? We're set up for a surround. We got more forces coming in for the Shambler attacking the third base at the same time. So ECalipso is going to have a lot to deal with on multiple fronts. His third now under attack as we get into this one. I don't think that this army can break through for the Shambler, but I'm happy to be proven wrong. Remember that Patriarch is not actually attacking the same unit as the Charlatan, so they're not maximizing the shielding, and that means the Zealots are broken through. Now the Protathlors can absolutely deal with whatever is on that side, and it looks like the tech army, yeah, the tech units are starting to fall. That Charlatan very, very low. Workers having to pull away as the Zealots come out of the gateway. We got a Patriarch on the high ground. Well, that's great, but you might need a little bit more weapon range to deal with what we're dealing with here. A lot of Protathlors. That seems to be the way, and I think Shambler's done it again. Very different composition this time around. We saw some Protathlors at the very end of the last game, but at that one point it was kind of already over. This time around they were a lot more instrumental, and I do think ECalipso was still making pretty good moves despite being down in terms of macro. And he's going to pop off the GG, saying, man, I'm being humbled here. I thought the Shambler was just going to be... I thought the Shambler was going to be easier. GG's. Oh yeah, and I don't think I ever updated the overlay. It should say Shambler 1.0. Oops. We'll go ahead and fix that up for you guys, just for posterity's sake. And yeah, listen, I'm happy that ECalipso was able to see the potential of some of the Zerg. Obviously, his preferred strategy versus Zerg was hit kind of hard in this patch, where the Ancestral Archives was rendered, I would say, has a more fair cost associated with it, considering what it provides. However, the Patriarch was always kind of... held at an arm's length by artillery units or sniper units, right? I'm thinking artillery might be more like crowd control. Sniper is like the role for the Protathlor and the Eidolon and stuff like that. The Silver Tongue, right? Those last two units being Terran. So yeah, I do think that that's something that the the Protoss are going to have to consider. How can we deal with this kind of Zerg? I think the answer definitely lies within the Lattice for the early game, because you really set the pressure and set the pace. You stop the pool units from taking over the map. However, I do also think that there are responses within responses, and it's going to be really cool to see how that meta evolves. So thank you for joining me for this cast. We've got more coming, so stay tuned for tomorrow's video, and stay tuned for even more action. GG.